All right, so this should be the final segment for this unending lecture um, as we turn attention here towards World War II itself. I mentioned at the very end of the last part five that conflict between China and Japan had been going on for several years, even prior to official declarations of war being uh, spreading across Europe. Um, uh, Again, this is largely due to the increased invasion of Japanese authority power in China itself. By December of 1937, you have incidents such as the rape of Nanjing itself, the old capital of China, in which Japanese forces seized control of that major city and committed acts of mass murder and rape of civilians, in which some 50,000 Chinese men and women were murdered, and many thousands of women, additional thousands of women, were raped as well. Japan, for its efforts, creates what's known as the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. This was Japan's pan-Arab vision that it laid out for the Far East and all of the people and nations, cultures of the Far East itself, to try and remove all vestiges of Western imperial characteristics and power. And many Asian populations initially bought into this vision of unity, autonomy, but very quickly they came to realize that Japan's true intent was really not to dissolve and simply um, remove European imperialism, but to superimpose Japanese imperialism on over top of the European imperialism to replace it in many respects. And as a result, this meant that those East Asian populations did not want that. I mean, they wanted autonomy for themselves first and foremost, not homegrown or Japanese style imperialism. World War II begins in Europe officially on September 1st of 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Poland had a treaty with both Britain and France, which Britain and France honored, and it resulted in their declaring war on Germany itself. In 1940, Germany, Italy, and Japan enter into what's known as a tripartite pact, creating the Axis powers. Germany overran France also in 1940 in a matter of about 6 weeks, using new military tactics, blitzkrieg as it was known within the ranks of the German military. Britain and the United States begin to coordinate strategic efforts, despite the US remaining at this period of time neutral, an official neutral power. But they were able to meet and draft what was known as the Atlantic Charter, which was not a proclamation of war, but a proclamation of war aims, so that if the United States entered into the war on the side of the Allies, the British in particular, then there would already be an agreement as to what the outcome of the war should be, and what the war aims were going to be. And this included an actual fulfillment of the rights of self-determination for the vast majority of populations around the world. In June of 1941, Germany is going to go to war with Russia in a very fateful decision. The German war machine is going to begin the process of invading Russia, um, where it would suffer the same fate as Napoleon's forces almost a century and well, almost a century and a half had earlier. In December of 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the location of the Pacific Fleet of the American forces, the American Navy. With that event, the United States entered World War II as an official belligerent. The United States, over the next several years, 4 years, becomes the world's arsenal of democracy, as FDR put it. This meant that over the course of the entirety of the war itself, the United States provided its allies with some 37,000 tanks, 792,000 trucks, 43,000 aircraft, 1.8 million rifles. And this was in addition to the US being able to equip its own forces that it was deploying on both not only the fronts in Europe, but also with regard to seeing to the war effort in the Asian theater as well. The United States also extended what was known as the Lend-Lease program, so that these war materials were simply, in many respects, just handed over. The idea of a Lend-Lease type of agreement was made publicly palpable, but really was not necessarily a, uh, going to be honor bound in any respect. This U.S. capability and productive capacity made it so that the United States was going to rely heavily on its female labor force. So this is where we get images of Rosie the Riveter coming from, because again, the jobs were being vacated by men who were entering into public service as draftees in the military, and women overall comprised between 25 and 30% of the labor force during World War II itself. With regard to the size of the U.S. military, we're talking about some 16 million Americans in uniform from 1941 to 1946. 11 million of those served in the Army alone. In addition to those men, another 333,000 women served in uniform as well. From 1941 to 1945, Germany is going to resort to what it called as its final solution to the Jewish question. This is what we know to be the Holocaust today, in which there was the extermination of some 6 million Jews in total in a matter of throughout the course of World War One from 1941 to 1945. But in addition to that, there were also 9 to 10 million others that were also rounded up and sent off to concentration camps. This included, again, gypsies, ethnic Slavs, Russians, Ukrainians, political prisoners, and even homosexuals, seen as kind of outcasts from mainstream society, according to the National Socialist doctrines. And this was all done in the name of racial purity. The United States also, for its part, resorted to interning Japanese Americans for the purposes of security. The FDR would enact what's known as Executive Order 9066, which would lead to the internment of Japanese Americans to forcibly relocate them from their private homes along the West Coast to the Western interior, places like Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, among other places. Again, the ethnicity of this population was seen as a security risk, that their loyalties might not lie to the United States government, but instead to the imperial government of Japan. There is a race here is entering into the conversation with regard to wartime policies. These Japanese Americans were not, were not exterminated, but they were nonetheless had their civil liberties curtailed and in many cases disregarded. During the 1960s, 1970s, there was a measure of justice that was enacted where Japanese Americans were able to seek reconciliation and uh, uh, reparations for their losses with regard to property and also personal property, but also real property. And the United States government, reimbursed or had a fund from which Japanese Americans could draw from in order to gain a measure of um, compensation. In 1943, Italy would be knocked out of the war, and by 1945, Germany surrendered. Um, Russians were able to seize eastern portions of Germany, including Berlin. French, British, and U.S. forces liberated western portions of Germany. That was in the spring of 1945. By the end of the summer of 1945, Japan itself would sue for peace after the two atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States. Um, the force of the blast was so, uh, the extent of the blast was so massive that shadows of individuals walking the streets at the time of impact were seared into the pavement, kind of visceral evidence to the sheer power, the awesome power of atomic technology, that the person had completely ceased to exist, had been atomized, but their shadow was etched into the pavement where they had stood when they're, when they died. The war's toll as a whole was awesome. The death toll is estimated to be in the neighborhood of some 50 million people worldwide having lost their lives, 20 million of them coming from the Soviet Union alone. Most of the world's dead were civilians, which was kind of a new standard for war of this nature. So it was almost more dangerous to be a civilian in World War II than it was to be um, in uniform, and it would lead to wholesale economic ruin for Japan, for Britain, for France, for Germany, Italy, and Russia as well. The entire industrial base of those countries was virtually annihilated. There would be also the social and political collapse in Germany, of course, with denazification of its population, decartelization of its economic system, demilitarization, so that Germany would not be a first-rate military power, and democratization of its populace, so that fascism would no longer be a major concern moving forward. That the German people would enjoy the benefits of again personal freedoms and liberties under a democratic system of government. Japan was to suffer much of the same kinds of effects. The one caveat that was made was that the emperor, the Japanese emperor, remained in power. That was the one condition that the Allies agreed to. But the state, the overall Japanese state itself, would need to be reinvented and would help to bring about a more, at least in structure, a more democratic style of government. But several countries needed to be rebuilt and virtually rebuilt from scratch. And this created a new scramble. Europe was divided between liberal capitalist and communist ideologies, communist totalitarian ideologies. As the Cold War became more of a reality in the years following 1945, Japan fell under the auspices and kind of the influence of the United States, under its complete control in many respects, largely as a result of the very rapid um, pursuit of peace following the atomic bombs uh, being dropped on their two major cities. In China, there would be the revival of the civil war between nationalists and communists. In 1949, that civil war would end with the communists achieving victory and assuming control over the entirety of China itself. It was only the United States that really remained largely unscathed during World War II. It was the only world power that was able to project its power around the world. Um, its industrial centers uh, of production remained intact, that they had not fallen victim to things like strategic bombing raids. The factories of Detroit and um, elsewhere throughout the United States were unscathed. The United States was also the only country with nuclear capabilities in 1945. Now, that monopoly would end in 1949 when the Soviet Union acquired the atomic bomb as well, helping to enhance and kind of entrench the Cold War itself. But at the very least, the United States was the first atomic power. Also, the United States possessed massive amounts of the world's gold reserve. Some two-thirds of the world's gold bullion was now housed in the United States itself. So, in many respects, the United States was the world's first superpower. And really, moving forward from 1945, the United States uh, had by that time come to understand not only that it was a world power, a superpower, but that it was also had matured to the point where it understood the obligations that came along with being and achieving that status. And so as a result, the United States turned to taking that massive gold reserve and beginning to channel it back out and around the world to rebuild these economies of these various states in order to ensure that they would help facilitate and create and sustain democracies that would again kind of enhance not only this ideological move towards freedom, but also to ensure that there were overseas markets for U.S. goods in a free market, capitalist, globalist uh, system. So you can see here, again, coming to the end of this extensive lecture, that conflict is going to dominate the first half of the 20th century. Out of each of these global conflicts, you have balances of power being really in a state of flux, as if World War I was fought to dismantle old imperial balances of power. World War II was fought to decide the orientation of a new balance of power, one where the United States was finally ready to take on that mantle of responsibility, and also one that it was ready to take on that responsibility because of this bipolar worldview, an us versus them type of mentality, pitting um, free societies and a capitalist system against communist totalitarian regimes led by the Soviet Union. Within that new bipolar world order, decolonization would occur. You have the rise of new independent states using the Cold War backdrop between the United States and the USSR, and turning those two um, superpowers um, to help advance the interests of newly emergent independent states as they began the process of decolonization to try and seek the best deal for themselves, whether that was going to be along the communist lines or kind of the Western democratic uh, line. So that gets us to the end of the lecture. Also at the end of to the end of the course. I know it's been a pretty tough 6 weeks, so congratulations. Um, um, we'll leave things here, kind of officially. I may if time permits, kind of post some um, appendice kind of lectures just to kind of give you an idea of the post 1945 world, if time permits. Again, we're getting into the 4th of July weekend, so we'll kind of see where things stand. It's been a pleasure. I hope we've gotten a lot out of the course, and wish you all the success in your future academic careers. Take care.